Pajama day. Chapter 21. Classes were moving through the halls toward the gym for the assembly. Kids and teachers turned and talked to us as we passed them. We mumbled short answers and greetings. We didn't have time to talk. We had to get to the door that led up to the stage and do it without running into Mr. Johnston. A couple of people asked to have a look at the snake. We brushed them off. There wasn't time. But anyway, I was only planning on opening that bag once, just before I handed it to Mr. Johnston. "Do you want me to carry the bag for a minute?" Augie said. "I'm okay." Suddenly it didn't seem heavy. In fact, I had the strangest feeling throughout my whole body, almost like I was floating, my feet just brushing the floor. Besides, now that we were here and it was all really going to happen, I didn't want to take my hands off this snake until I put it directly in Mr. Johnston's hands. Up ahead, we could see Mr. Scully standing by the stage door. "Cutting it a little tight, aren't you, gentlemen?" he asked. "We didn't want to get here too early in case we ran into Mr. Johnston," Augie said, offering the perfect excuse. "I was just getting ready to call home to find out where you two were," Mr. Scully said. "Now here's what's going to happen at the assembly. Our principal will be addressing the entire school, talking about the break-in and how the theft and vandalism have had an effect on everybody, how troubling it has been to have our school violated. Then he's going to mention how some students worked very hard to help clean up the school. He's then going to call up Mr. Johnston and ask him to present certificates of appreciation to those students. Mr. Johnston will be calling the two of you up to the stage to receive your awards." "We're getting awards?" I asked. "Of course not," Augie said, answering for Mr. Scully. "That's just so we can all be up on stage together to give Mr. Johnston the snake." "Exactly," Mr. Scully said. "When he calls your names, the two of you walk onto the stage with the snake." "I have a little speech," Augie said. "Do you want to hear it?" "I'm sure it will be fine." He paused. "Is the snake in the bag?" "Yes," I said, holding it up with both hands. "That's a big bag. Just how big is the snake?" "It's pretty big," I said. "It's even bigger than Bogart was," Augie said. "We got a really good deal. Lovely." "Do you want to see it?" Augie asked. Mr. Scully shook his head. Judging from the look on his face, he really didn't want to see the snake. "We don't have time. You two have to take your spot at the side of the stage." He pulled at the door. It was locked. "I'll circle around, open it from the inside, and let you in," Mr. Scully said. "You nervous?" Augie asked me. "Not as much as I thought I'd be." "So standing in front of the whole school doesn't make you nervous?" he asked in disbelief. "I'll be fine. I'm not giving a speech, and besides, I'm not the one whose fly isn't done up all the way." Augie's eyes widened, and then he reached down and pulled his up. "Stupid zipper keeps slipping down." "Augie, Ricky." We turned around. It was Elise. "You two had me worried," she said. "I thought you weren't going to show." "We were a little worried ourselves," I said. "Yeah, something happened that we didn't quite see coming. We'll tell you later." "So you're not usually late?" she asked. "Hardly ever," Augie said. "Good, because there's nothing worse than going to a dance late. You missed the first dance and..." "Dance? What do you mean dance?" Augie asked. "The dance, this Friday. I was hoping we could go together," she said. "You want me to take you to the dance?" Augie gasped. "Not you. Both of you. What do you think?" I shrugged. I wasn't planning on going. "Of course he's going. We're both going. How about we pick you up around 7? "That would be great, and I hope you don't mind, but a friend of mine from my old school is visiting, and she'll be coming with us." "That would be no problem," Augie exclaimed. The stage door suddenly opened. Mr. Scully popped his head out and motioned for us to enter. "Why don't you come in with us?" Augie said. "Best place to see everything is from the stage." She shook her head. "It's you two that belong up there on stage, but I'll come and watch from the wings." We walked through the door and up a small set of steps. The stage was just off to the side. It was deserted except for our principal and a couple of kids from the audio-visual club who were setting up 2 microphones in the middle of the stage. The kids waved to us as we followed Mr. Scully across the back of the stage. The curtain was closed, but it didn't block the sound of the crowd. I suddenly had a rush of fear, bigger than in the alley just a few minutes ago, bigger than when I discovered the snake was gone. I had to fight the urge to simply hand Augie the bag and run away. The thought of standing in front of the whole school felt everybody would be staring at me. I reached down and checked my fly. At least that part of me was still okay. "This is where you wait. Now remember, stay out of sight and wait for your cue. You'll be coming up on stage almost immediately after Mr. Johnston does. Break a leg." "What?" I asked. "It's theater talk," Elise said. "It means good luck." "Thanks," Augie said. All at once I became aware that the noise from the kids had faded. The teachers must be quieting everybody down. It then got brighter where we stood. As the big curtain at the front was pulled back, Augie peeked around the corner. "The place is packed," he said. Of course, he wasn't telling me anything I didn't already know, but my stomach still tightened another notch. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," called out the voice of our principal, Mr. McDonald. I could tell by the metallic sound of his voice that he was using the microphone. Augie leaned close to me. Bet you $1 he uses the word cooperation before he introduces Mr. Johnston. No bet. He uses that word in every speech. Elise grinned. He uses that word in every conversation. Shouldn't you get ready to pull the snake out? Yeah, sure, I said. I put the bag on the ground and started to untie the knot. My hands were shaking slightly, and the knot seemed to be a lot snugger than I remember tying it. It must have tightened up during the walk. I'd now like to ask Mr. Johnston to come forward to present the first awards, our principal announced. Hurry up, Augie said as the crowd clapped for Mr. Johnston. I'm trying, I said, my fingers fumbling with the burlap knot. I pulled at it desperately as I heard Mr. Johnston start to talk. Maybe I could just hand him the sack and let him open it in front of. The knot slipped open. These were very difficult times for all of us, Mr. Johnston said. Maybe for me more than for other people. He paused, and I could feel the emotions of his words sink into my skull. It had been awful. But some students helped to undo the damage. They worked to try to make things right. I opened up the bag and looked inside. The snake was coiled in a big ball. I thrust in my hand and fumbled around trying to grab it just behind the head. It came to life and started to twirl and jerk around. The last thing I wanted was for its head to grab me, for it to sink its fangs into my hand. And the first two students I'd like to acknowledge are Ricky and Augie. Could they please come up onto the stage to accept their awards? Mr. Johnston called out. Come on, Augie said. I'm trying. Finally, I grabbed the boa by the head. With my other hand, I reached farther into the bag and grabbed the rest of the snake, pulling it free of the bag, which then dropped to the floor. Elise pulled back the curtain to let us walk onto the stage. Let's go, Augie said as the crowd started to clap. I followed Augie as I stepped onto the stage. I heard first a gasp and then total silence. Nobody was expecting a snake this big. Then somebody called out, and then somebody else, and then everybody started to clap and cheer. I didn't dare look out at the crowd. Instead, I looked straight ahead, straight at Mr. Johnston. His eyes grew large and his mouth dropped open. He looked completely and utterly amazed. Augie stepped to one of the microphones and then raised his hands in the air to quiet the crowd. They didn't want to be quieted and kept on cheering for a few more seconds. Mr. Johnston, we have to apologize for tricking you, but we wanted this to be a surprise. All of us were pretty upset about what happened to Bogart, and Ricky had an idea about how to help make it up to you. Almost everybody in the whole school chipped in money to buy you another boa constrictor, and we'd like to present you with that snake. Augie turned to me. Ricky? Unbelievable, Mr. Johnston gasped. Unbelievable. I stepped forward, reached out, and handed Mr. Johnston the snake. He gently took it from my hands. As I released my grip, it felt like a gigantic weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I don't know what to say, Mr. Johnston stammered. You don't have to say anything, I said. It was just something we wanted to do. I looked up at Mr. Johnston standing there, holding the snake, and for the second time in my life, I saw a teacher cry.